Greetings, book lovers, and welcome to Authorized. We are delighted to welcome an author who writes both fiction and nonfiction, as well as being a playwright and a music editor. I should also note that I have known Peter for many years. He was a kid coming into the library when I was the director in Fairview, New Jersey. Peter Danish is an award-winning author, educator, and marketing consultant. His public speaking book, I'll Give You Exactly 5 Minutes, was a #1 Amazon.com business bestseller. His novel, The Tenor, won ReadersFavorite.com Best Historical Fiction Book and received an honorable mention for Best Historical Fiction from the New England Festival of Books. His newest novel, Medjugorje, takes us on a journey to a holy shrine in a war-torn country. It's a mystery about an American filmmaker visiting Medjugorje to research a film about the extraordinary goings-on there. Peter's also the classical music editor-in-chief for BroadwayWorld.com, one of the nation's most popular arts and entertainment websites. Welcome to Authorized, Peter.
Welcome, Arlene. Thank you. Full disclosure, Arlene was my first crush when I was 14 years old. She was, I think, 15 or 16.
Yes, that's right.
She was the director of our library.
You are what I would call a Renaissance man. Tell us a little bit about yourself, Peter. I mean, I know you have quite an extensive...
Well, since we last spoke...
No, really, tell us about yourself.
I, after college, went into the television industry and spent about 20 some odd years there working in marketing in the television industry, writing sales pitches, presentations, commercials, PSAs, speech writing. And then I finally got tired of writing for everybody else and found that I had a story to tell and I wasn't getting it out working in the television world. And it took, ironically enough, a trip to Bosnia, where I met my wife, to convince me the time was right. I was at that point in my life where I needed a change, and that was the catalyst for it. And that trip and the multiple trips subsequent to that provided the background for Medjugorje, the current novel. So.
Before we talk about the novels, let's talk about your nonfiction work. I'll give you exactly 5 minutes, which is done very well.
Yeah.
#1 business bestseller.
Very pleased, yeah.
Tell us about that. What kind of expertise do you have? What is it that you do for people in this book?
What I found in my years at NBC, I was speech writing. And what you find when you're a speech writer is most folks that you're writing for, you also have to coach subsequently. And you're trying your best to put words in their mouth that you think are going to sound natural from them to the extent possible. And I had written hundreds of speeches. And finally, I had a mentor, a fellow named Steve Levin, God rest his soul, he passed away. He said to me, you should really write a book, because you're by far the best I've ever worked with at this. And I said, I don't really have a system per se. And he said, I think you do, and you don't even know it. So I literally sat down, plowed through boxes of old scripts, and found commonalities in the better speeches, and found the things that, not so much a system, but elements that every successful speech had in some shape or form. And this fella, Steve, who I just mentioned to you, was the best public speaker I'd ever seen in my life. Absolutely magic in front of 5,000 people, 500 people. And one day, we were in a restaurant, and he had to give a speech after dinner, and he was a nervous wreck. And I said, what are you nervous about? You're the best speaker I've ever seen. He said, I hate speaking to very small audiences, just a couple of people. I said, why is that? He said, I always forget. What do you mean? He said, I always forget. I go blank. And that's a fairly common problem that a lot of public speakers have. They say they go blank when they look at the audience. I said, oh, I have a way to beat that, trust me. And when I told him the quote-unquote secret of the system, he said, that's your book. Now, he passed away a few years ago, and it wasn't until I was sitting down with former president of Fox News, Joe Pirinen, and he said to me, Levin's right, you should actually put that system into a book. It's so simple, it's so easy, anyone can use it, they can apply it to any situation, whether it's an after-dinner chat or whether they're speaking to a theater. And the idea basically is it helps you memorize 5 salient points that you want to make sure you get across during your presentation. And the idea is very simple. You literally take the time to jot down what are the things you want every single person in the audience to take away with them at the end of that meeting. And then align them in a cogent fashion so that you won't forget them. You don't need notes, you don't need slides, you don't need a speech, you just have to remember 5 words. And it's worked marvelously for hundreds of other speakers whom I've coached. So, and the publisher is now pushing me to do a sequel. Ironically, I have a great anecdote about that. There was another publisher, a very, very big publisher who I won't name, that saw the book about a year and a half, 2 years ago and wanted to publish it, but they said it's too short. You need to put more filler in here, you've got to put some illustrations and some graphics and some this. And I said, so you're asking me to put filler into a book about the importance of brevity. So I realized that they might have been, I might have gotten more success going with them, but they were not really the right publisher for my material. And what I did with the book, every small writer, I'm not a Harlan Coben, I'm not James Patterson, you have to put a certain amount of your own time and resources into marketing. That always happens. And a certain amount of your money into marketing. What I decided with that book was to try something different. I reached out to 3 charities who I supported anyway. And in this particular case, it was Covenant House. It was Homes for Heroes, providing homes for homeless veterans. And People to People of Rockland County, my home county, which is the food pantry, New York State food pantry for Rockland County. I knew they had their own constituencies. So I offered them part of the proceeds in advance in exchange for them talking up the book to their various constituencies, and it's worked out like a dream so far.
Excellent.
And I've been asked by a lot of websites on not-for-profit giving to come and speak on that subject of out-of-the-box thinking for charitable organizations. So, and I encourage all my other author friends, and the publisher has now taken this up. He's now recommending to all of his authors, you should consider giving a portion of the proceeds away to a charitable organization in exchange for marketing, for them marketing it for you. So far it's been a big success.
Excellent. So let's move on to your fiction. What inspired these novels? Very different novels?
Very different novels, very, very different novels. The tenor is historical fiction set, it's told in 3 parts. First part takes place in Italy prior to World War II. Second part takes place in Greece during World War II. The third part takes place in New York in the 1960s. And it was born of, I was reading Arianna Huffington's biography of Maria Callas when she was Arianna Stanisopoulos, before she became Arianna Huffington. And there was a very short anecdote in her Callas biography about an Italian soldier who used to sit outside Maria Callas's window and listen to her vocalize. Now at the time, Callas was 15 years old, she was a young girl. And the Italian army was occupying occupying Athens. And there was a very strict curfew, no music, you couldn't go out at night. And even at that age, the young Maria Callas was kind of sticking up her nose to the Nazis. And this Italian soldier would sit there and listen to her night after night, defying his own curfew. And I said, that guy sounds like a really cool guy. I wonder if this is true. So I did a little homework and found that it was true, and that Callas tried to find him after the war, but in all honesty, he probably perished during the war. But I thought he was an interesting enough character to give him a life. And I built around on both sides prior to and after that incident. I gave him a life. And I shot a copy to Arianna. saying, I don't know if you recall this little brief thing you mentioned in here, and she said, of course I do. So I sent her it, and she liked it a lot. She's asked me to blog for Huffington Post now as a result of that. So, yeah, that was cool.
And Medjugorje?
Medjugorje is a completely different animal. Medjugorje is a small town in Bosnia and Herzegovina, in the Herzegovina part, the southern part. In 1981, 4 little children saw visions of the Virgin Mary on a hilltop. And she called to them and spoke about conversion to them, about bringing people to her, and it became a worldwide phenomenon. These little kids, could they possibly be duping the world? The language that they were using, the doctrine and the dogma that they were quoting were far beyond what 8 and 10-year-old kids should be capable of. So it was suspected that someone had put them up to it. And as a result, there are over 1 million pilgrims a year that visit the area to this day. And around a couple of years ago, my wife had this great idea that it would be romantic to take a train ride to Niagara Falls, something right out of the movies, train to Niagara Falls. The train ride up to Niagara Falls was wonderful, romantic, beautiful. The ride back was a nightmare. The ride back, the train broke down, and we were on the tracks, sitting there outside of Rochester for about 4 or 5 hours. The people around us in the car became savages. Girlfriend and boyfriend break up, husband and wife are fighting, friends are punching out, it became chaos. And I said to my wife, what do you think would happen if something like this happened in your country, in Bosnia? And she said, bloodshed. So I instinctively pulled out my laptop and sat there and just jotted down bits and pieces of everything I heard from the warring couples on there, and that became the basis of the novel Medjugorje. And I tried to figure out where exactly is a place in Bosnia, in the country, where a lot of people would take a train to, or take a bus to, or go on a pilgrimage to. And then I realized a pilgrimage, of course, the Holy Shrine, where everyone goes to pray for a miracle. And that part of the world is very unique, in good ways and bad ways, because you've got several different religions, different ethnicities, living very close to one another. You hate to say that their differences go back 1,000 years, but their differences go back 1,000 years. And it took Tito, who was the president of Yugoslavia, the premier, with an iron hand kept them under his thumb for 50 years after World War II. In 1980, he passed away, and things started to slowly fall apart. And in 1991, the war broke out first, and then 1992, the Bosnian War broke out, as first Croatia. Slovenia was the first nation to pull out, then Croatia, then Bosnia, and suddenly you've got major war in the middle of Central Europe, an ethnic cleansing, a Holocaust, and you had most of Europe turning their eyes away, not wanting to get involved. Our country turned its eyes and chose not to get involved. One of the sadder moments in U.S. history. And I learned at that time that when Germany, France, USA, when everyone had turned their back on the Bosnians, that opened the door for Iran to come in with their mujahideen, because it was a Muslim country largely. It opened the door for Eastern influences to come in there, and to this day, you've got that all across Europe. And I think this is one of the stepping stones towards that situation. When we think about it today, all the problems we have with radical Islam and stuff, and this is one of the ways that it starts, that it ferments.
Well, to digress.
To digress.
Can we just go back to the tenor?
Sure.
Did I read in your biography that you wrote that entirely on a bus?
I wrote the entire tenor on a bus. That is absolutely true.
That is absolutely amazing.
I live in beautiful Nyack, New York, And I had about a 90-minute to 2-hour bus ride in the morning into Manhattan, and a 90-minute to 2-hour bus ride home every evening. And I got to the point where I looked forward to my commute, because I went to the back of the bus, pulled up my laptop, and I went into another world. I put my headphones on, I put on some opera music to put me in Italy during the war, and I had a minimum of 3 solid hours every day in my commute, every day. That's a real gift. Try and find 3 hours in your day. You just can't find it. Even if you've got all the time in the world, you can't find it. But when you've got it dedicated, you know you're going to be on that bus. I made certain that every morning I was awake and aware, not sleeping on the bus. I was up there journeying back to Italy during the war, and the entire thing was written there. I often joked that if the bus ever went on strike, I'd be screwed. What would I do? I'd never be able to finish, you know? But that's 100% true, yeah.
Wow. Talk a little bit about your writing style.
My writing style is, well, I have different styles, because obviously I've got a bit more academic style for the business things. I'm a fan of history, and I think there's such a rich history all around us that we never tap into. I was stunned when I was doing the research for the tenor, for example. When I went to Greece to meet the folks where Maria Callas grew up, to see her house, which is still standing there, to sit opposite her window, her little balcony. It was like Romeo and Juliet, thinking she sat on that balcony and he sat right here. You know, it was like something. You get this sensory moment that was you couldn't even put a description to it. Then you go down to the square and you play backgammon or rummy with the old men, and they all tell you they all knew her, and they all knew she was going to be great. But it was the stories they told, and the people whom I met there actually became characters in the story. Some as they were, because they were colorful enough not to change. Some were composites of several people. But if you read the book, Spiro, the musician, and Kostas, who was the vendor on the street, they were real people whom I met, who were so magnificent. They were right out of central casting, and they were natural. They were just, every word they said sounded like a proverb. It was a different time and a different place.
In reading Medjugorje, I have to tell you, your scenes were so clearly delineated. It was like I was reading a play, or I could see the staging of that. I don't know how to articulate exactly what I mean, except it was so clear.
Well, you're a very adroit reader, because Medjugorje was a play.
Is that right?
That is 100% correct. It was initially drafted as a play.
I didn't know that.
You're good. She's good. I wrote it as a play. And I submitted the play to my publisher and said, what do you think about this? And he said, well, I don't publish plays. But he read it and loved the story, and he loved the twists in it. And he said, this is a novel. This is not a play. He said, these characters are crying out to be embellished upon and to have more of a history to them. And it didn't take very long to realize he had something there. And there was so much more. I could have written a 3-4 hour play, but you have to try and keep it within the confines of a 2-act structure, etc. But with a novel, you don't have to do that. But I wanted to keep it within a 24-hour time period. The whole book takes place within 24 hours. And that adds some tension to the story, but more importantly, it makes it very real. It's
yes, I kept
right
going
now.
back,
Yes.
looking at what time was it then? Yes.
And you realize the clock is ticking on them, and yeah.
Now, I mentioned that he was a playwright, but honestly, I had no idea that had been a play.
Yeah.
Talk about the play I just went and saw, about the Easter Uprising.
Just completed a play called, ironically enough, it literally, the ink was barely dry when we put it up. A play called The Final Days of Wolfe Tone. Wolfe Tone was the George Washington of the Irish Revolution, only he failed. And he led the United Irishmen in the late 18th century 1798 was when he was executed, and he was an extraordinary character. I had been a fan of his story since college, since 1,000 years ago. I had an English lit professor named Sister Teresa Brady. For you Pace University folks out there, you're all going to remember Sister Teresa. And she had an Irish lit seminar. And I read Wolfe Tone's biography. And it was magnificent. He had a day left on Earth. He was not allowed to see his family, not allowed to see his friends, not allowed to, but he was allowed a priest. So being Irish, what did he do? He got his best friend to dress up as a priest and come in and bring him whiskey, and they had a ball in his last days on Earth. And he was absolutely dead set on committing his story to the record himself, because he was deathly afraid that if the English were left to tell his story, they'd probably just expunge it completely, or they would make him, less than the hero that he was. And he was right, because the biography didn't get published for some 40 years after his death. And I'll tell you an anecdote, no I won't, because that would be giving away too much. The historian whom he tells his story to, if you remember the play, a fellow named Thomas Wilson, he asks Wilson at the end to take care of his wife after he's gone. In reality, 20 years later, Wilson marries Wolfe Tone's widow. So it was kind of a lovely wrapping up of all that. And I have good news on the play. It looks like, knock on wood, we've been approached by a couple of theaters to continue its life. Around this time of year, St. Patrick's Day, all things Irish are kind of hot. So we reached out to some Irish theaters and have gotten interest from quite a few of them. So keep you posted. We're really thrilled about that.
That's great.
For next year.
So who are some of your favorite writers?
I'm sad to say my favorite writer of the last 50 years just passed away, and that was Umberto Eco. And Umberto Eco's books spoke to me like nobody else's. And I couldn't say why. There was just something about them that were magical. And I love magical writing. I love magical reality. I think that, and I don't think he was specifically a magical reality type of writer, but there was something magical about his settings, about his characters, about his prose. He had characters that were larger than life in very horrible situations, and that juxtaposition made them wonderful. If you ever read Baudolino, I don't know if you ever read that, Baudolino is my favorite. He's my favorite character of the last 50 years. He's a street urchin who, as he says, is illiterate in 12 languages, who lives in the north of Italy during the time of Frederick the Great and Barbarossa and the Great Crusades. And he winds up getting a job as Barbarossa's Redbeard, Frederick the Great. He winds up his translator, his official translator, because he lies to him convincingly enough and tells him he speaks all the languages of Eastern Europe and he can get him to Constantinople, when in fact he doesn't speak a word of any of these languages, and his gobbledygook gets them in all kinds of crazy troubles, and no one even bothers to question what's going on, and he writes the history of the Crusades. It's actually he's writing a book about the history of the Crusades, and it's just brilliant, funny, sad, magical. Like I said, and you don't find, Eco is not for everybody. It's very dense writing, but I wanted them to be longer. I never wanted them to end. A lot of folks read The Name of the Rose.
I've read that, yes.
Fantastic book. But relatively speaking, compared to most of his others, are short book. It was 350, 400 pages. Some of his other books are 1,000, 1,200 pages. And I think he fell into a little bit of the trap that a lot of great writers do. I don't use the term loosely, great writers, successful writers. Look at what happened with Rowling's and Harry Potter. Look what happened with, who wrote The Hunt for Red October? Tom Clancy. some of these writers decide at a certain point, I don't need an editor. Who knows my work better than me? And you see what happened from like Harry Potter's first book at 300 pages to the last books at 1,500, 1,000, crazy length. You could take 500 pages out and never even notice it was gone. And similarly,
There could be those that would disagree with
of course,
you.
yeah, but I'm saying, but the same thing I'm saying with Echo. I ate it up and wanted more and more and more, like I'm sure a lot of the Harry Potter fans just couldn't get enough of it. Similarly with Tom Clancy, his first 4 books were masterpieces when there was a Cold War. When the wall fell, he didn't have as much to write about. And his books grew from 300 pages to 600 to 1,000 to 1,200, crazy lengths. And he had these tremendous amounts of information dumps in there about things that any real editor would have taken a red pen to, but at the time he didn't allow anyone to edit his work. And I think Echo was a little bit that way too, towards the end, that he didn't feel anyone should be editing his work, that who would know better than him.
So is Badolino your favorite fictional character?
I would say Badolino is my favorite fictional character of the last 25 years. Of all time, I think that my favorite fictional character is Pierre Bezukhov from War and Peace. There was a wonderful BBC War and Peace that just ran a few months, last month, or the 8-part series was pretty good. It's hard to combine all that into. And they did an 8-hour version, so it wasn't a short version. Characters 100 years ago, 150 years ago, 200 years ago, characters in literature were much more round than we allow them to be today. They all had levels and levels and levels and levels, and they all underwent changes and journeys. And Bezukhov, Pierre, in the beginning of War and Peace, is a completely different human being than the Pierre at the end. He undergoes this social change, this spiritual change, this physical change, and he goes from someone who's absolutely not someone you would root for, unsympathetic character, drunk, lazy, rich, to the most sympathetic guy in the entire story. And his journey and his peeling back of layers to show who he really was as he got to know himself. It's one thing to show the reader who he is, but another thing to show the character over the course of the book. Who he's capable of being and who he becomes is a gift that, you know.
Did you try to do that with your characters?
I haven't tried to that degree. I tried a little bit with Pino, who's the character, the hero of The Tenor, because I had the luxury of 40 years of his life taking place. So in that I was able to show, but they were very different chapters. It was him as a teenager, him as during the war, him as a 45-year-old fellow living in New York City. They were very different. It didn't take place in a purely linear fashion. They were very much episodes. And yeah, he became wiser because he got beaten down by life. And he saw all of his dreams pulled away one by one. And in the beginning, he was very hopeful and wistful about it. At the end, he was, que sera, sera, what are you going to do? And and not to give away the spoiler, but when the opportunity appears at the very end for all of his dreams from childhood to possibly be realized, he becomes like a child again. He has all those feelings he hasn't had since he was 18 years old. All the problems, all the mistakes can be wiped away. If I have this one opportunity to correct it all, I better not blow it. No pressure, right?
Are you working on anything now?
I am working on something now.
That's like a really stupid question to ask you, I think.
Well, I have the play that you mentioned, we're working on right now, trying to get it out. I have another play that we did a big reading of back in August called Herb and Lenny. That was very well received, and it was basically what you and I are doing here. It's the story of the final meeting between Herbert von Karajan and Leonard Bernstein, the two greatest conductors, musicians of the 20th century, right before both men passed away. And it's based on a true story. They had a cup of coffee together in the Sacher Hotel in Vienna, and no one knows what they discussed. And when I found out reading Bernstein's letters, which were published last year, another really big book, half of it is completely mundane stuff about him going to the dry cleaner, and half of it is him talking to world leaders. On one page, you've got him talking to John F. Kennedy. On the next page, he's yelling about that damn tailor broke my buttons again. You know, shows the real life of it all. And I thought, what would these two men at this point in their life, of mega celebrity, mega stardom, mega wealth, but 50 years of animosity and hatred for one another, what would they say to one another in their final meeting? And I thought that would be incredible to be a fly on the wall for that. And when I found that nobody had any record of what they discussed, I sat around thinking about it first, and I jotted down ideas just for my own edification. And then I said, you know what, this would make a great play. And luckily, some folks have agreed. And that's one that we're out there now pitching to some theaters. And we've had some interest in it as well, so keep you posted. In a literary bent, I'm working on a murder mystery.
Oh.
Something completely different from what I've done in the past.
Completely.
Yeah. It deals with, do you remember John Benet Ramsey?
Sure.
And do you remember Elian Gonzalez?
Sure.
Okay. Elian Gonzalez, for those of you at home who are playing along, was the little Cuban kid who washed ashore. His mother died getting him from Cuba to Miami, and the father, still living in Cuba, wanted him back, and the family in Miami didn't want to let him go. And John Benet Ramsey, of course, was the horrific child murder in Colorado 10 years ago. And I kind of combined the two stories into one and set it in Little Havana in Miami, which is a completely, it's a clack, an area where you can grow up, live your entire life, and die without speaking a word of English. It's a completely, unified area that's an enclave of Hispanics. And I worked for many years for Telemundo, so I spent a great deal of time down there. Incredible people, incredible cuisine, food, culture, music, beautiful. But a very, very closed, if you're not one of them, you're not one of them. And I always like to think I was kind of an honorary one of them. And during the time that the Elian Gonzalez thing happened, I was driving across Calle 8th Street down there for work. And I was, I guess because I was the fairest skinned guy in the neighborhood, parked at a red light. A bunch of guys started jumping on my car, banging on my window, and I thought, wow, I'm lucky to get out here with my life. And I was doing nothing, I was just driving home from work. And I thought how crazy circumstances can happen to anybody at any time for no reason at all. And that was kind of the basis for where the story has gone. I'll keep you posted on that one.
Yeah. Is there anything else you'd like to say to our viewers about your work, about your life?
No, right now, very busy working on the plays. New book probably middle of the year, next year. That's one. Some of your previous guests talked about editors, and editors are your best friend. And we talked a little bit about it too, but finding the right editor is really important. And my books have been so vastly different from one another that the same editor is not the right person for each of them. So I'm now looking with the publisher for the person who edited these books I don't think would be right for the murder mystery. So we're going to have to do a little bit of work, a little homework on that, and that's what's coming down the pike in the immediate future.
So now we're going to do something we call Authorized One-Liners. I ask you to pick up one of your books, open to any page, read us a few sentences, and talk a little bit about that part of the book.
You have a preference?
I don't know. You want to do the newest book?
Let's do the newest one. Okay. We do this blindly. Okay. In the story, 5 strangers of different ethnicities and faiths are on this bus that breaks down on the way to Medjugorje, the site where the miracles are happening and the little children are seeing the visions of the Virgin. late one night, I call them the pilgrims on the bus ride, two of these characters couldn't sleep, and they're having a coffee and a cigarette in the middle of the night chatting. One is named Amir, and he is a young Bosnian student, and one is named Itzhak, and he is a defrocked rabbi from the United States who's kind of on the run for reasons we can't go into. At this point, you have the Muslim and the Jew chatting about their respective faiths. Amir looked up at Itzhak and smiled. "There are many roads," he said with a laugh, "and this one has brought you to Medjugorje." Quite true. You know, while I was in Lourdes recently, I did a little bit of reading about this place. Lourdes, Fatima, Medjugorje, thought Amir. He isn't leaving any stone unturned, is he? The apparent contradiction that Itzhak was able to consider the miraculous at a time when his belief in God was shaky at best made Amir smile inwardly. He was beginning to feel real affection for the old man. After reading about Medjugorje, in truth, I was not very convinced. But then I read an interesting statistic. Did you know that a recent survey worldwide, 90% of doctors believe that religious faith can heal a sick patient? Doctors say this, not priests, not imams, not rabbis, doctors. Then I came across the account of an Italian doctor who had come to study the children of Medjugorje during their visions. It impressed me deeply. He hooked them up to electrocardiograms and electroencephalograms and monitored their heart and brain functions during the visions. Wow. What did he learn? He learned virtually nothing. They registered almost no perceptible differences during the visions. However, he did notice something else, not about the children, but an incredible phenomenon nonetheless. Each time, just at the moment that the children's visions began, all the birds in the trees went completely silent. And that, my friend, is why I'm going to Medjugorje. So you have the young Muslim student and the rabbi who's lost his faith asking one another, "You're Jewish, I'm Muslim. It's a Catholic shrine. What are we doing?"
Mm-hmm.
And they both explain to one another in their own way why they're putting their faith in it.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Really?
Glad you liked it.
That was a great passage.
Yeah.
So thank you, Peter Danish, for
My
joining
pleasure.
us at Authorized.
Would love to come back.
Well, next time, get a book out there.
Your book.
Check back again soon for more inspiring writers talking about their inspiring books at Authorized. Thank you.